Thanks everyone, and thank you to the fellow panellists for joining me. Decarbonisation and productivity are absolutely linked. I think the more and more we're seeing integration across a range of different issues in the industry adds complexity and makes these things a little bit harder than they probably were 20 years ago when some of us started in the industry. I wanted to start with a comment on decarbonisation. I was at the CEO lunch yesterday, and there was a comment on, is decarbonisation still relevant? And I think, despite policy changes and announcements in the US, those who ignore decarbonisation, those who ignore ESG, those who ignore licence to operate, just aren't going to be able to raise the capital needed, aren't going to be able to attract the workforce, and aren't going to be responsible to continue what our industry needs to be able to do those things. One failure for the industry impacts us all, and I think we all need to remember that as we go forward. Many of you will know EY does an annual survey on risks and opportunities in the mining industry. This year, operational complexity was the #1 risk. It was quite interesting when we sort of reflected on why that got there. The mines we operate today in Australia were designed for a 20-year mine life. Many of those mines that we designed for a 20-year mine life are now operating at 50 plus years in terms of what's there. They just weren't designed for that. The logistics systems don't work, the installed capital isn't quite appropriate in terms of what there, the workforce is ageing in terms of what we're doing. And all these things are impacting productivity, and we remain stuck at productivity levels that just aren't high enough in terms of what's there. The answer is absolutely innovation. The answer is technical excellence in terms of what we're doing, and focusing on those is important. We need to do that while we continue to keep that focus on decarbonisation. And I think that's what we're hoping to sort of explore today as we sort of work through. We'll cover each of the topics as we go. I thought I'd start with the two mining engineers in terms of what we got. So Euan, perhaps if we sort of sit with you, I guess in your operations and as you're running things, what are the biggest practical challenges you face in embedding decarbonisation at the operations?
I think the biggest challenge is getting these things to get off the ground, so making it actually stack up. A lot of the big hitters on the decarbonisation space involve a lot of capital. So if you have a short mine life, let's say, or you're a mid-tier with not much capital, getting the numbers to actually stack up is a challenge. The other is, I guess, the mentality of being a fast follower. You kind of need if you do have some of these solutions, it costs a lot of money. You kind of want to see it proven before you commit that. And a lot of the technology now isn't quite proven yet, so there's a lot of uncertainty. The other main one, I guess, is having sources of electricity in the supporting infrastructure to actually realise that decarbonisation. We have some mines and jurisdictions where electricity isn't clean. So, do we kick off some electrification space when it's actually going to result in?
Yeah, and I think often the promise of cheap electricity after we've paid for some of that capital with renewable energy, certainly in Chile, the results to date haven't quite fallen to that, so it's certainly a challenge for those providers of that electricity. Luke, Byrnecut's advancing automation pretty significantly, and electrification obviously comes with that underground and has multiple benefits. What practical lessons have you guys learned in terms of rolling out electrification at scale?
So I'll start with automation, because we've been on that journey for 10 to 15 years now. And we probably see electrification is going to be no different. It is a journey and it takes a long time. We've tried to make sure that we achieve steps along the way to where we are with automation. Our sites now with trucks, drills, loaders, there's automation in some way or another on all of our sites as a standard, but it didn't just magically happen overnight. It was a long journey, it was training, collaboration with multiple different teams. So the practicality of the electrification for machines is pretty much the same journey. We learnt that going full battery straight away rather than going to hybrid machines might not be the way to go, because we can upskill our people, on electric drive machines without the complexity of the batteries. A lot of the same things that Euan talked about in regards to mine life. As a contractor, even if it's good mine life, we might not have contract life. So being able to spend that money on infrastructure is very difficult for us. So we try and keep it as close to what we can control as a contractor. And if we need to move machines, then fixed infrastructure isn't one of our hurdles.
So your clients should all be thinking about longer contracts for you?
Yeah, and I think as that way we'd be able to invest a little bit. So yeah, it's a great idea.
Absolutely. Maintenance is obviously a major factor in terms of productivity and improving productivity as we sort of go along. You know, with operational complexity and these mine lives extending, we're seeing that, you know, installed capital equipment is much older than we ever intended it to be, but we're also pushing mobile equipment much harder than we thought. You know, whether that's longer haul distances, whether that's more complex operating conditions, whether that's operating under a water table, we're seeing maintenance just getting harder and harder, and availability is reducing. Malcolm, I know MOVUS has been looking at condition monitoring and doing some work around predictive maintenance. Can you tell us some of the work you've been doing and some of the innovations, and give us an idea of some of the outcomes?
Sure. I mean, predictive maintenance, condition monitoring, prescriptive maintenance has been around for almost 10 years now in industry, and we learned a lot with regards to making sure that the assets that we can monitor and the issues that we can detect are providing and identifying those issues well in advance, so teams can actually take action and make sure that they're getting to issues before they affect production. But most importantly, I think one of the things we're looking to work on is the fact that, you know, older assets that have been around for 50 years, they obviously aren't as efficient as when they first started up, and they'll generate a lot more heat. Heat is obviously drawing a lot of energy. And so there's going to be a correlation at some point where we can actually identify the point at which you can do maintenance through vibration analysis and the energy consumption, and bringing those points together where you can actually identify this is the optimum time for maintenance to make sure you're reducing electricity and energy. And we've seen up to 2% reductions just from more efficient maintenance as well. So that's something we want to be looking forward to, is sort of helping not just to prevent breakdowns and make maintenance more efficient, but actually reducing the energy footprint from these machines that are getting older.
Yeah. And typically, what are the barriers to adoption of those sort of tactics?
From my personal perspective, a lot of the barriers come down to actually just people changing the way they do things. There is a lot of cultural resistance. People used to doing things the way, and there's a resource challenge as well. So people focus on getting things done. You know, a breakdown happens, or you know, you've got critical maintenance and PMs that need to happen, and that's what their focus is. I mentioned in my speech yesterday, there's an accuracy element of condition monitoring, predictive maintenance, and prescriptive maintenance diagnosis that comes into it. A lot of the time, environments are different. Every mine site's unique. Every piece of equipment that's operating in a different environment is different. And so there's often some tweaks we need to do with AI and machine learning to make sure that it actually works efficiently. We need feedback from operators to do that, and we need the operators to buy into that. If they don't do that, we can't improve the accuracy of the system. And with that challenge happens, you get alarm noise without that feedback, which then stops people from using it because they think, oh, the system's going to be wrong, I'm not going to worry about it, and they get disengaged. So a lot of our work has been with making sure that people who do deploy condition monitoring and maintenance make sure they are providing us that feedback, so we can make sure we can really make that stuff accurate and give them sort of value for what they're doing and make their jobs easier, so they're not relying on too much noise, but also making sure they're getting more efficient at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Tomer, I guess we've talked for a number of years now about digital being the answer to help us solve productivity. Yeah, there's been some good results, and then some that, you know, I don't think we've had failures, but I think you'd have some that have been disappointing in terms of what's there. I think people are very hopeful that AI is really going to deliver in terms of what's there. I know Razor Labs is doing some work around how to use AI to sort of simplify, how to use it to detect things. Can you give us an idea of some of the things that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're trying to push machines to do more, but not necessarily with the right maintenance layers. And what we're trying to achieve using sensor fusion technology is by combining different sets of capabilities, different sources of data, almost like a doctor, to allow you to understand the machine better, but really building a knowledge base to actually create this kind of capability to understand more about your machine. We've created over the last 15 years a set of predictive models that have been trained using experts in the market and our technology really to better understand how machine behaves so you don't have to retrain them over time. Remember that the problem with AI is not the technology, it's the trust. Unless you build trust with the teams themselves that what you do actually works, if you don't start small and actually deploy predictive maintenance in a way to produce value and not just work on symptoms, but actually provide you with a root cause analysis, then the entire effort doesn't work. So we had some customers, having some bearing failures because they didn't rotate the drum before they turn it on again. Local teams couldn't see it. So if you don't have the ability to analyze it through multiple different sources and you rely on the human behavior or the human being to actually do the work itself, it results in catastrophic failures that happening typically on a Christmas day or Christmas night, and you have to bring a crane, which we all been through. So remember, AI is not just the buzzword of what's going on, it's about the process, and it's very important to get your engineering team to be part of the process and not do it on top of their head because of an interest from management or operation. It's about collaborating together and making sure that you start small, you're scaling it up, and you're figuring out what actually makes an impact to the organization itself.
And you're finding the clients you're working with have got the data that's needed to be able to run some of the AI models and get things to work?
When we started actually as an AI company building deep learning models probably 9 years ago, we built models. It was interesting. Ever since we were starting to ask customers to bring data, it appears like everyone has data, tons of data. They can't really transform it. We're still waiting for some customer to still send the data out. We actually created a suite of products or sensors to allow them actually convert the data into something that we can actually use. Just installing sensors is not the game. Everyone has sensors. You got thousands of sensors deployed. Some of our customers have sensors that are not connected for years right now. So I think it's about the right data at the right time, being able to analyze it in the proper manner, really produce the right value for you. You can actually use it. You can take oil sensors, you can use vibration analysis, you can use temperature, current, you can use vision analysis to identify rips on a conveyor and actually understand what's going on and whether this one is blocking, is creating a liner wear on your crusher versus creating a problem in your mill downstream. So there's many different ways, and the idea is how you push it forward, really to allow your customers to actually understand more from the data that they have, and if they don't have, don't send them on a task to acquire more sensors or more data because it's a long process. Just come in with a complete suite, build it, get the bottlenecks, figure out what needs to be done, and fix it.
I think my first ever day working on a mine site, the general manager at the time sort of said to me, if you're not reducing costs in the mining industry, you go out of business. Your next ton you mine is always more expensive than the previous ton you mine. And it seems like today that every single mining company has a cost reduction program on at the moment. And you sit there and you go, commodity prices are good, and the central bank tells us we haven't got inflation anymore. But you look at costs, and they certainly haven't come down. And one of the areas where we're seeing still significant increases and really costs stuck at a level that is quite high is electricity and energy in terms of what's there. I guess one of the good ways to tackle energy costs is to reduce use. Has the added benefit of reducing emissions as well. Emily, I know Schneider's done a lot of the work in that space. What are some of the success stories you've seen?
Yeah, so I think, your point is right, but it's particularly important as Australia as a mining destination versus the comparisons, right? And so, and obviously power costs represent an enormous component of mining operations costs in Australia. So, absolutely, to start with, we're seeing our customers very focused on what the opportunities are for cost reduction in power. And then I think in the decarbonisation challenge that we've been talking about, the element of that as well is that power has essentially become a constraining input to process rather than being a kind of unlimited resource for the production outcomes that are being achieved. So, there's a few sort of dynamics here, and what we are seeing, I think there's been a number of discussions that we've had at this conference and on an ongoing basis from an energy management perspective. It's certainly a very large focus to that point of discussions in the sector at the moment. The bottom line, though, is that while there is a big uplift in the technology capabilities that are available, to the data that mining companies have available to understand what's going on within their businesses, the reality is that still there's a real challenge in having access to the right data and the right insight in order that you can really do the hard work of understanding where the energy use is most being focused. I think one of the areas that we see the most activity is in relation to bringing together, and I know sometimes in this industry digital twin is a bit of a dirty word, but bringing together digital twin, process digital twin and power digital twin, and really looking at that on a co-simulation basis, particularly for new mines or even extensions for new generation facilities. Really, that I think we're seeing one of the most important ways of designing from the beginning, really on an efficiency basis. At the end of the day, it's the really hard work of how do we actually fundamentally change how we go about our processes to drive energy efficiency, and then how do we really understand where the energy consumption and where there are opportunities for reduction. And then it's really an application of all the tools that we're talking about across the value chain on a targeted basis where those opportunities exist. That unfortunately there's not an easy way of going about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I spent the last couple of weeks in Palo Alto, and the new digital twin that NVIDIA's got is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like it, I think people that have been disappointed when they've seen one in the past should go and have another look. It's quite spectacular.
We are
what it's
certainly
able to
seeing
do.
some traction in the market in that space.
Yeah, definitely. Well, ICMM recently reduced their stats on fatalities in the mining industry, and very concerningly, for the last 2 years, fatalities have increased. I think, as I move around the industry and I move around the sector, we do lots of things that are fantastic. Acknowledgement to country is a great thing. Talking about diversity is a great thing. We always used to start mining meetings by talking about safety. We were very focused on the safety share, and we were very focused on what we've done. I think we've lost that a little bit, and I think it does need to become our number one focus again in terms of what we do. We absolutely have to reduce that fatality rate and get that back under control in terms of what we're doing. And that's hard. We're chasing productivity, we're chasing innovation, and we're doing that with a workforce that is less experienced than we've ever seen before in terms of what we're doing. I think, changing work processes, electrification, better equipment in terms of what we're doing are one way that we can address workforce safety with automation, those sort of things. Luke, how are you seeing automation and electrification really impacting safety? Is it having a significant impact for you guys?
I can't agree more with the statement about how we have to go back and concentrate on. We've had a program recently on exactly that, pre-start meetings.
Yep.
So that they're not just get in, talk about it, and then leave and not remember anything that was in the room. So there definitely needs to be more focus. With the electrification side of things, again, putting it back to the automation journey over 10, 15 years, the upskilling of people is paramount. We've got now electricians that normally working on fixed infrastructure that are having more interaction with the workshop and the mechanics, and so there's a lot changing, and there's skill shortage everywhere. So with our training, we're upskilling our people, but you really have to put that in yourself. There's no guideline. Everything's moving so fast in the technology space that the trade schools, the mines department, they're not really keeping up with setting good guidelines in regards to this is what you should do. So you've got to take that on yourself, which is a big journey. We spent 18 months risk assessing for the BEVs before we put them on site, and then they get there and there's still things that you need to learn because you don't know what you don't know. So it's having a massive impact. We work with all the trades. They're actually talking about introducing some new models into the mechanical trade so that it can cover off on the electrical vehicles. So It's having an impact, but again, going slow on the journey to upskill your people. If we go too fast and we don't upskill them, the chance of incidents way higher. So, yeah, take your time, do it properly, get the right skills in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is a critical one we've got to get back to in terms of what the industry thinks about. We've certainly been getting back to starting meetings with the safety share and doing those sort of things. I think it can feel like it's not real at times when you're not doing it within a site, but just reinforcing that need is really important, I think. But maybe I think if we switch back to technology and have a look at what some of you are doing around technology and those sort of things. Malcolm, Toma talked about AI in terms of what he's doing. What are you guys seeing from an AI perspective in terms of diagnostics and using it to sort of cut down costs, reduce emissions, improve productivity? What are you seeing from an AI perspective?
I guess the AI side of things is the constant learning process. We're constantly getting feedback from the customers in terms of what's accurate, what's not accurate, and then tweaking the AI algorithms and machine learning to make sure that we get that more accurate as we go along. As I said, I was looking at some data over the last couple of weeks of the last 12 months of a group of assets, and we'd had a 92.5% accuracy rating 3 months ago. When I looked at it recently, it was up to almost 93%. And across 14,000 assets, that's fairly significant. In terms of failures that we missed, it was less than 0.5%. And so, once upon a time, I think those figures would have been just completely unheard of. You're always going to have unplanned breakdowns, and people used to pride themselves on how quickly they could repair something. And we're talking about the safety aspect of it. The more you've got people in range of machines, particularly the old traditional guys that like to feel it. I was recently at a plant where they talked about, oh yeah, we had something, and a guy was there when a rapid disassembly process happened, and it was a giant fan. And if you've ever heard stories about fans breaking, they're quite dangerous in terms of making sure that they're out of the way when that happens. But the reason the fan broke was because they had some condition monitoring sensors they hadn't actually deployed, and they had them for 2 years. So as much as the AI advancement we can do a lot of that, and it's going to get better. And I think one of the current limitations is that we're all working within our own individual data sets. And Emily, you mentioned the challenge of trying to get the right data. I think large language models such as ChatGPT have an advantage because the language is everywhere and they've learned from that data sets. But I think there's at some point in the future, I don't know when it'll be, there probably needs to be a democratization of data where we all start sharing all this data, and then we can really sort of take advantage of what generative AI potentially can do, because it really needs those big data sets to be able to learn unsupervised and take advantage of what we can do now. Yeah.
Luke, maybe next question for you, sort of without notice. How do you find sharing of data between yourselves as the contractors and the mine owner? Does that create issues in terms of integrating sort of digital solutions and AI for the future?
It's getting better. And it's funny because as they were talking, I was thinking exactly the same thing. Even though unprompted, it's not too bad. It's getting better, but interoperability is what I see needs to happen for the next 3 to 5 years, so that we can start to use best-in-class solutions with other solutions. We shouldn't be having to use one solution because of the colour of the machine that we buy, and to be locked out with proprietary systems. If we want to use Razor Labs for predictive maintenance, that should be able to bolt onto anybody's system. So data sharing's getting better. Contracts are making it better as far as data ownership, but there's still a long way to go as far as everybody wanting to work together. And it drives up what we end up getting delivered, because everybody has to compete on the actual solution, not trying to lock you out. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I think we've seen, with Sandvik and Komatsu in particular making some pretty significant investments in technology. I think they've realised that sort of open and collaborative system is much better, and I've certainly noticed some big improvements from those guys.
Even talking to Sandvik yesterday, and their drive is to modulise a lot of their technologies now, so that we can plug in and plug out, which is a big change.
Yeah.
So I think we're on the right path, but everybody needs to get on board.
Yeah. Emily, how can mining companies accelerate the adoption of solutions, whether it's AI, whether it's some of the more practical ones? What are the things they can do? What are the steps they can take?
And it's always a big question, right? Because it's all well and good to have these amazing tools or widgets or whatever it happens to be, but if no one uses them, it's a large waste of time and money.
Yep.
So, you know, I think it's the straightforward but really hard stuff of, you know, understanding what the problem is that you're really trying to solve in as much detail as possible, and who the stakeholders are, making sure they're engaged as early as possible, particularly the users, and really not ignoring change management. I think sometimes mining companies are not desperately awesome with change management, and it's an incredibly important part of the process. And, you know, I think being able to demonstrate that value as early as possible and then at increments. All those things, it's easy to say though, all those things are really hard to do on a consistent basis. You can start off well, but, you know, I think, you know, having a clear focus around the way to execute that is critical, and particularly the stakeholder piece.
Yeah. It's good that it wasn't the consultant that's mentioned change management. We've had that twice now.
Well, I used to be one.
It's been very positive. And I mean, you guys obviously play in a part of the value chain. Are you seeing collaboration across the value chain and across different suppliers as you sort of move across?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this event is a clear example and a really important example of collaboration. And there's endless discussions about collaboration. I think the way to sort of really drive the outcomes that are impactful is to move from talking about it to actually doing it in a focused way. And you know, certainly Schneider and Aviva collaborate across the value chain. I do think that there's, you know, in Australia there is an enormous amount of collaboration, but particularly at the sort of early stage innovation end of the market. And certainly big suppliers have a much bigger role to play in supporting and getting those capabilities to market and, you know, being a channel. So, you know, there's always ways that we can prove it. I think so if we look back compared to, say, where the mining sector was on collaboration 10 years ago from a technology perspective, we've come a long way. There's always more to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the copper sector has been really good for us. I think particularly the way that copper mines have been developing in Chile with lots more joint ventures and districts and those sort of things. I think, you know, for too long iron ore and coal in Australia were very much barriers to collaboration. I think copper's been great in terms of advancing.
Lot to learn from there.
Yeah, definitely. Toma, I guess, you know, you talked about pilots and starting small in terms of what people are doing with AI. Are you seeing people move beyond pilots and sort of, you know, I think, you know, probably the second lesson I got taught after reduced costs is that, you know, when you solve a point solution, you just move the problem rather than really solve it. We've got to go end to end in terms of what's there. Are you seeing scaling beyond pilots and seeing some good successes there?
Absolutely, and I think the key is value confirmation. So at the end of the day, you're not doing a pilot to test technology, right? As Luke mentioned, there's technologies, there's data, there's everything coming through, and there's tons of problem. You need to make sure you understand how to solve and how to generate value for the organization itself. Testing technology for the sake of testing it doesn't help anyone, and most of the pilots are not successful because of this one. So you need to start with the end in mind. You need to make sure that when you look at, in our space, predictive maintenance or AI solutions, you understand what you're trying to solve. Is it reduction in unplanned downtime or unplanned maintenance that will impact your resources? Is it a reduction in spare parts because you're having too much and you have to change the same pump every quarter, although it's not really required? And if you had some kind of an insight into what's going on in the pump, maybe you can change it every 6 months. And now you push the entire CapEx out of, right? It might be you want to push more tonnage. So we do work on the Electric Caterpillar in Komatsu's in one of our sites in Colombia, and we started in the port itself and then did our way all the way to the beginning of the chain itself, starting from the reclaimer and stackers and the conveyor all the way down to the trucks themselves, only to show value across the chain. So if you're able to show value, you need to make sure there is 100% accuracy. When the ship comes, you need to load it, take it off, and ship it off. If it doesn't, then you're stuck and you're paying penalties and it doesn't really work. So it doesn't matter how good your technology is, as you mentioned. If we fix one part of the process, but we push it over to something else that is not our responsibility, no one cares, right? So you need to make sure that your entire cold chain actually works for you. And it can work in copper and in gold, in any other operation. So to me, it's more about value confirmation, making sure that you have a great methodology, you understand what are you trying to achieve. You start with the end in mind, you're figuring out how to actually operate, and you work with your customers. If they have data, consume the data, try and make it happen. It's not about installing what you have and seeing how it's going to work. It's about collaborating. We have some partners in the crowd and some of our integrators here that are really working with us to assimilate our methodologies with the customers to work cohesively into building a joint success versus just completing a pilot for the sake of completing a pilot.
Euan, from Oceana Gold's perspective, where have collaborations with technology providers delivered the best results?
Where I've seen it work well is probably not the best solution. It's like when it's forced. So you've had an incident and there's an immediate safety problem that forces people to the table. We need to fix this. Not meeting target. We need to do something. So that's probably an excuse about just forcing that collaboration. So, and that collaboration goes. That collaboration probably goes both ways. So when you have a small supplier and you're one of the first pilot projects, they're on site helping you every step of the way, as opposed to maybe you're a small fish in the ocean, you're not the biggest customer. So yeah, things like OEM, working with contractors with the mobile equipment work well. Explosive suppliers, some quite a good cases there. So yeah, when the collaboration piece works from both sides, that's when you really see results.
Absolutely. Great, thank you. Maybe just to wrap up, maybe we'll start down the end with you, Tom, and we'll just move up sort of the panel. We're at IMARC again in 3 years' time, talking again about productivity and reducing emissions. What's the one thing that people have done that's really had an impact on those?
I think over the next 3 years, probably reasoning with AI, leveraging the actual AI that we see into a place where there is context and people can use it in a more frequent way. We use ChatGPT today. We want to make this one applicable for the workforce itself, not on a small scale problem, but really pushing it forward so you start seeing this one applying in a more frequent manner.
Great. Luke?
I definitely hope we're not still talking about how we're going to get the data. But I think infrastructure in underground mines, especially the smaller ones in Western Australia, we can have all the tools in the world, but if we don't bring all that data to the surface, have enough electricity and connectivity and the interoperability piece, so they're the keys for us.
Malcolm?
I think from my perspective, just the rate of change in technology, it continues to accelerate at the end of the day. And at the same time, we have a culture in industry where, change can be resistant or it's slow to change. And I think we need to figure out a way we can shift our mindsets to sort of start embracing the technology and really looking forward to how we can improve things rather than just constantly be on the back foot of the receiving end of, oh, I'm not sure about this, this is a little bit scary, I'm going to resist, or take some time before I sort of really embrace it. If we can really figure out how we change our mindsets to look forward and how we take advantage of technology, I think that'll be a really big change for the industry.
Luke stole my one, so I'll probably, about the data, getting that from the surface. I work in the underground space, that's a challenge, so I'll probably take that one step further and ask to share between mining companies the data to try and get these projects off the board so that we can try and improve the efficiencies that some of this technology has.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd say moving from sustainability as a target to practical and pragmatic solutions and execution to really drive the value, the outcomes, but also the energy efficiency values that come with it.
Great, thanks Emily. I think it's important to realise at times you might think productivity and emissions don't go hand in hand, but if you think back to that traditional definition of productivity, less inputs for the same output or the same inputs for more output, productivity increases do have a natural impact on emissions. If you actually achieve your productivity goals, you are going to reduce. So I think it was a great session to sort of remind that. My hope is that we're all still inquisitive. I think one of the great things we get from being at a conference like this is the chance to learn, the chance to share. I hope that we keep that in the industry and we keep moving forward. Innovation's been what's driven this industry. There was no way we were thinking about operating at some of the grades we're operating at today, at some of the depths we are. We need to just keep that innovative sense and keep moving forward. Please join me in thanking the panel. I think you've done a great job in terms of this. Thanks, everyone.